Hi, welcome to the AI Wave podcast. I am your host, Chris Parisi, and we have a new series, AI and Education. So it's going to be a three-part series. We have three guests that are really in tune of what it's like to have AI in the education space. And in this episode, we have Lance Eaton. He is the Director of Faculty Development and Innovation at College Unbound. And he brings a whole host of information, resources, lessons that he's learned, and how they're doing it at College Unbound. That's really unique, incorporating the students into what the syllabus is going to be. They actually change it after week one. It's wild. You got to stay tuned. You got to listen and hear that and more, such as free tools that he has available for you to learn from. So get ready and continue to ride this AI wave. All right, we're back with the AI Wave podcast, and today we have a great guest in our AI and Education series, Lance Eaton. Lance, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Really happy to be here.
So Lance works at College Unbound, and we're going to really dive into what AI and education, specifically in the higher ed, is all about. But before we get into that, Lance, let's let our audience know a little bit more about you. Are you a true Rhode Islander? Did you born in the state and never leave?
I am a transplant for the last 2.5 years.
Okay.
I came here particularly because I ended up at College Unbound and originally was going to commute. I'm from the greater Boston area. And we realized, by contrast, and this was 2.5 years ago when interest rates were lower, that houses were affordable. Again, by contrast to the greater Boston area.
Yeah.
So we promptly moved down because now I can work 3 miles from work as opposed to 60.
Ah, that sounds great. So the cost of living here, quality of life is great here.
Yep.
You got a great job. And so far you're liking Rhode Island these past 2.5 years?
It's great. I live in an area where I'm close to Roger Williams Park. I'm 3 miles from work. I'm near Save the Bay. There's lots of great things to be done. Going downtown, it's excellent to be able to get downtown in 15 minutes. I don't know in any other city in the greater Boston area where that's possible. So that's really appreciative, and also a cyclist, so enjoying despite some of the more challenges that are apparently going on politically, appreciating that fact that I can get around on my bike pretty easily across town and such.
Well, it's always great to hear. We mentioned this earlier that I'm on the board for Millennial Rhode Island, and our mission has always been for talented folks to choose RI, right? We want those that get educated in the state to stay here, as well as folks like yourself, these professionals that come to work here or have a job around here, maybe not even have a job anywhere near here because of the world that we live in that's remote, to stay here, and that's great to hear.
Yeah.
So you are very deep into the education space. You've been instructors for many different universities, but I want to know, what was your experience as a student growing up in the education space?
Yeah, so it's this interesting mixture of on one level, I am a nerd. I there were things I would just get deeply interested in. I grew up as the internet was coming into life, so learning about and playing on the internet in the 90s. So there was these pockets I got really excited in, but also my educational experience. And I think learning experience and educational experience are two different things. My learning that I would go and do on my own, I really enjoyed. And then being in, traditional educational structures, I did not enjoy so much, especially in the middle and high school space. When I got to college and I had more agency, had more power to choose what I wanted to do, it was a very different game, and I really enjoyed that, and had really good role models who helped me figure out I can continue to nerd out. I just have to find the right program to do that in.
It was kind of combining what you enjoyed learning into your education. Is that right?
Yeah, it was having to figure out where I could where were the pockets that excited me and how to get to those versus the spaces that we were forced into, whether it was the social mix of higher education, of high school, or even in college, the things that I had to take so I could take the things I wanted to take. You know, like I continue to go back to like, I took weather and climate, you know, I took geology. These are courses I can't tell you anything about besides I think that's a circuit. I can't even say which clouds they are at this point. So those types of things that didn't draw me or excite me versus the courses that like I just dug into and enjoyed.
I feel you on that. I remember I had to take ecology as a marketing major. Ooh. Yeah, really relevant. I only remember one thing, and that was what a K population is, the maximum amount of people that we can have on this planet for the amount of resources we have. Yep. No use whatsoever, but that was the one thing I learned from that elective. Right. So that was interesting, like, because you kind of realized as a younger student that, hey, education is not for everyone the way that it's currently built. And if there was maybe a more personalized way to build curriculums, right? Is that what one insight that you took out of your own experience?
I think that personalization and being able to follow the interest, follow the curiosity, and not have it squashed out. The other part of that, though, and this is something I had to do a lot of learning in like graduate school and stuff, is also the mentorship of guidance, because there's a lot of power in going and learning on your own, but without another human to provide some context, some insights, some ways that like you might be missing, or you might be missing key pieces. You might be missing key aspects that have to do with beyond just like learning the content, but how you think about the content or who you think about it with, because learning is also relational. And so to me, there was that like, yes, I definitely leaned into finding my own way, but time and again, where I had the hugest leaps or the deepest developments always ended up being in relation with other mentors or other learners.
Do you think AI could replace that mentor ever?
That's actually the thing I'm most concerned about. I think AI can do a lot on like the content and helping us, like helping somebody find their way.
Right.
I think about it in grad school for me of like, God damn, I hope I can say that. Like, God damn, I wish like AI was here, because I remember being in grad school and we're reading these dense theoretical texts, people like Michel Foucault, who is like super important in like certain, the master's I was working on was American Studies, and it's like super important, and it's also like I can read the same paragraph 15 times and still not know what's going on. So like going to in being in a graduate program, like you don't feel empowered to be like, I don't understand a damn thing of the 100 pages we just read. Like you don't feel empowered to show your ignorance because it's a graduate program. So being able to go get an AI to be like, help me understand, like explain this to me like a 5-year-old, because that's what I'm feeling right now, would have been helpful, which meant when I came back into that space with others, I could engage in the conversation in a different way and still like understand what we were looking at and not trying to just understand what we looked at in the conversation that was happening.
That makes sense. And what drove you to, from that graduate school, right, to say, you know what, I'm going to stay in the education space, but maybe be on the other side and help others? Like, what drove you to that decision?
I think it was, I mean, the drive came from, again, the more that I started, when I finished the master's program, I started teaching. And the more I taught and the more I thought about teaching, the more I realized like there's so much enrichment that happens when you come to it with the mindset of like, I'm not the sage on the stage. I'm not the authority. I am part of a learning community, and I have the opportunity to learn just as much. And this is one of the things for me that is like led me here to Rhode Island in College Unbound is, you know, there's a frame of approaching education that is grounded in this work by Paulo Freire called the banking model. And in the banking model, we see a student and we're just like, their brain is empty. Let's cram it full of knowledge. Let's bank information. That, first of all, denies anything that student might know about themselves, know about the content, know about like the learning space that they're in. And like, that is how a lot of us are taught. That is like that shows up in lots of our education. And I was moving more towards this just recognition of like, when I'm in a space with other learners, if I keep my learner mindset, the idea that I'm not just here to share or guide learning, but I'm also here to learn, the possibilities for what happens in that space, in the growth for myself and others, completely changes. And that's something for me that like College Unbound has tapped into so powerfully, and why I've been in higher ed as like an instructor, a staff member, a student in different capacities, sometimes all three at once, for like 25 years. And like, this is the place I wanted to go to. Like, wow. This is the place I wanted to be because it is different from elsewhere.
And how would you say it is different from elsewhere, right? Like, I know you just kind of gave some examples, but if you can kind of quickly let our audience know.
Yeah, so it's a fairly young college. We have one degree, organizational leadership and change, a bachelor's degree, and we work through a cohort model. So when students come in, they're put into a cohort with other students and work with what we call a lab faculty member, who they all take a class together every semester that they're here, that they're at the college. Within that, we're also doing project-based learning. And so the idea is like, we have this really powerful degree, organizational leadership and change, and it's also a really flexible degree. Where you want to go is kind of how you can direct it. And so the project is really like their passion project. They identify how do they want to execute organizational leadership and change in the communities that they're in. So semester by semester, they're building that project individually, but in that cohort of learners. So that's like one thing that's going on throughout their education. And then they're taking what we know as like traditional instructional courses, your asynchronous or synchronous courses. And in those courses, we also approach it from this lens of like, first week of every course, they meet with their instructors one-on-one. And the instructor is there like, well, I've designed a course. It's a really great course, but it's designed for an abstract set of students. Once the instructor does those one-on-ones, learns what their projects are, why they're in the course, what they're passionate about, the instructor adjusts the course accordingly. Because if you find out 8 students are really interested in topic X, and you were going to cover topic X for like 5 minutes in week 7, but you now know 8 of them, that is why they're there, you should change. Like, you should change the syllabus. You should be thinking about, well, this is what they're coming in here for. We have adult students. Our average student is 37. Like, they are people in the world who are aware and are knowledgeable of what they want and what they need. So why aren't we listening to that? So to me, that ability for instructors to open up and not just like hold tight to the syllabus. And I say that as somebody who's done that. Like, I'm not right. I'm not trying to like dismiss anybody, because teaching is hard. Yeah. But like, to be able to step into that space and trust with students and build learning together just creates a very different outcome, creates a very different experience.
Wow, that is very unique.
I'll extend that and pull us into AI, because that's how a lot of the work that I've done has led me into doing a lot of work around AI in education. College Unbound is the type of school where like I went to my provost in December 2022 when ChatGPT just came out. I'm like, we need to figure something out. I think I have an idea. I was like, let's throw the spaghetti on the wall and see if it sticks. I said, okay, we first need to put out a temporary a temporary policy around the usage of generative AI for faculty and students, because like, we need guidance. This tool has arrived. We know students are using it. But what I would like to do, and this is what I did during spring 2023, is I wanted to run a course, and I did, on AI in education. And so with students, learn about, play around, think about the implications of what is this new tool, newish tool, generative AI, and how do we think about it in teaching and learning? And what would be the usage policies that we would want to see at College Unbound? So we did that in the first session. We came up with a set of usage policies after playing with it, talking about it, figuring it out. We ran the course again, like back to back. And in that second course, we had students actually kick the wheels on it. The assignment was, take these, go look at other assignments in your other courses, and try to break these policies, not outright, not just like go and violate them, but like find the loopholes, find the problems, find where it's too restrictive, find where it's too loose, and let's revise them. And so we did that. And then after that, we had a set of good policies. We presented them to faculty for feedback. Faculty, like, they gave good, useful feedback. Often it was around like clarifying language or making sure there's equity among the like expectations. And then they like, but otherwise they were really excited about it. And we recently, about a month and a half ago, we passed this as our institutional policy.
Wow.
So here's a course where students actually like learned about and made an impact in the institution about how this tool is used, not just for students, but for faculty.
You're like
as well.
fine-tuning policy.
Right.
About providing a feedback loop.
Right. And so they're learning. They're also contributing to helping us figure it out.
Yeah.
It's like this really beautiful mutual exchange versus what I've seen elsewhere in higher ed around this, where it's just like you create this vast task force of like, 20 people across the institution, and you'll put one student on it.
Right.
And the student is sitting there next to people with titles that are 3 miles long. So like what we did with students here is like perfectly represents kind of how we try to think about what it means to be an institution that is working with and letting students lead the conversation, not just telling them what to do.
That's a great point. When we talk a lot about, in this whole series about AI and education, it makes sense to include those that are getting educated, right? The students, whether we're talking about K through 12 or higher ed like we are right now, getting them involved is just a smart policy, right? Whether it's the right thing to do or not, which it is, it's also smart policy so that we can understand everything that we're creating is for them. So let's get them involved and create this collaborative feedback system. So that's quite brilliant. And it worked out, obviously, because what you're telling me is that with College Unbound, you're now applying that in your university level policy. Is that correct?
Yes. So it is our institutional wide policy. It is, I can't like 1,000% confirm this, but I'm like 99% sure that it is the first policy developed in higher ed that was actually started and centered by students. So I don't think there's another institution, at least from the ongoing, like looking for other examples, that actually started with and had students leading the process. And I think it was, for me, really powerful of like making sure students are involved in this process because they will reveal things that you didn't think of. And I think that's important because it's not just like, oh, what are all the hacks? But they actually came up with really interesting edge cases, really interesting queries, really interesting challenges. One of my favorites is one of the students came to class one day as we had the policy and it was really struggling of like, okay, I'm looking at this policy and I'm trying to figure out like, I took my notes, I put them into ChatGPT and told them to organize my notes. Like, ultimately, I'm going to write a paper around my notes, but do I need to cite that? And so, like, here's a student really thinking about how am I using this tool? Where, like, am I going to get in trouble for doing something like that? And what I liked about it is it helped us figure out, like, where are those lines? And that's a lot of the education discussion is, like, trying to figure out where are the lines where we want to use it or use the different versions of it, and where are the lines where, like, or like, the line where we should be clarifying that we're using it, and the line where, like, no, we don't actually have to talk about it. Just like all the other tools, like, you don't have to report that you use grammar check. Like people want you to use it. They don't want to even think about it. So that's one of the things I really appreciate is learning with students the things they're thinking about and trying to navigate.
You mentioned one of the challenges when it comes to AI and education. There's a lot of opportunities, but let's focus on the challenges right now, whether that's on the educator side or, let's say, a perspective from a student. What do you foresee as some of the main challenges currently facing today when it comes to AI and education?
I think the first reactive thing is always the academic integrity piece, and like that's always been there. And so whether it's because of AI or not, like that's just something, there's a bigger problem around that AI is people concerned about AI being used for academic dishonesty. AI is a symptom of a larger problem. when I move beyond that, I think for me, a lot of it is just first understanding in order to use it well, in order to feel like this is something that can be helpful in the learning context. Both educators and students have to figure out, like, you need what I've called two buckets. One bucket is a good understanding of what AI is. It doesn't mean you have to be under the hood technically, but conceptualize and understand when it creates responses, what those responses are, like how it comes to its answers. And then the other is you actually need a good understanding of the topic that it is talking about. Without those two things, you can't assess its outputs. And so I think for me, it's, one of the biggest challenges is really thinking about AI literacy, because in order to have AI literacy, you have to actually build that on top of information literacy and technology literacy and media literacy. And these are all forms of literacies that we don't lean into enough. We're still often just talking about, textual literacy, which is absolutely important, but I don't see enough of these integrated things across curriculums, whether K through 12 or in higher ed, to make us feel fully comfortable in understanding what it is we're doing with these tools. So that's a real challenge. And then to me, the next challenge is just understanding the where of the where and what purpose does this tool serve for faculty. Where do we draw the line about where it can be used? Because it can absolutely be used in really cool ways to help faculty out. I've done lots and lots of workshops and had lots of great conversations of building content. I love it as example creator, because you can always find good example of students' work, but you're never going to ask a student for a bad example. But if you want to provide examples of work for students to figure out an assignment or something like that, bad examples are helpful. So it's things like that. It is.
You even mentioned how with College Unbound, the instructor will have that initial course and be like, oh my gosh, they all want to know about topic X. I got to switch up my syllabus and I have 0 minutes to do it. Well, maybe AI can then say, oh, here's your normal syllabus. Here's what the interest is. How can I switch it up? I'm sure that would be helpful.
Absolutely. So it's things like that where you can, in having that knowledge of what does and doesn't work. But then there's other questions about where does this fit in around feedback? Where does this fit in around taking students' work and giving it to an AI to assess? How does that change the relationship, or how does that make some students feel of you expect me to do this manual labor of writing this or typing this or creating this, and then you're just going to feed it into a machine. When it's not multiple choice tests, that, there's something disingenuous about that. That I think that will encourage students just be well, they're not even going to look at it, right? Because again, there's relationships in learning. So I think that's the question is, where does the AI improve relationships and where does it distance it? Because the thing that I get worried about is we have a very strong emphasis on AI is a hyper productivity tool. And that's great in some contexts, but in learning, in knowing how much people treat learning like a business, the idea is going to be about productivity, churning people out. And so I have no doubt we're going to see at some point some institution or organization is going to be well, you used to have a ratio of 1 instructor to 20 students. We can now with AI be 1 to 50. And the problem with that is the student that is in that was in that 20 that's now in that 50 also has now instead of a 1/20th relationship with their instructor, they have a 1/50th. Right. And who is that going to impact the most in terms of the students that need the most support and help? So there's just those lines that I worry about where the tool gets pushed upon people versus where people find important ways of it actually enhancing those relationships.
And where can you say that let's go back to one of the challenges we're about when it comes to the dishonesty, right? And I know you talked about it briefly, so just kind of go back to it. I just think of my sister, who's a teacher, has been a teacher at least in the K through 12, right? And the last 2 years or so, or last year and a half, a lot of these teachers have been fighting this battle without much support from leadership. There's no tools that they're being provided with currently, at least some systems, maybe all. And they're really struggling with it. And they have a love-hate relationship that's mostly hate. What would you say to just the regular K through 12 teacher that is battling this dishonesty challenge, so to speak?
This will be probably, I would say, a fairly radical view. So I'll preface that of like, you don't have to play cop. Like, that is ultimately the structure that we're setting up. Is we are creating a system where part of what so much is challenging about education, this is both higher ed and K through 12, is that productivity orientation. Learning isn't linear, but we have a learning system that is like all or nothing, forward, or staying back, or having a different course is seen at is framed as that person is dumb. It is framed like it is a negative framing. So all those kids feel like if they care about their learning or they care about moving forward, which that the caring might have been like lost on them because of the system already, but if they care, they don't care about the learning, they care about the grades to be able to move forward.
Right.
So like we are privileging the wrong thing in attention. And so in that context, like, yes, students are going to take the shortcut because the shortcut feels safer. Even if they get caught, like it still feels safer because it just takes so much to learn. People's inner experience of learning versus how we pretend it happens in a classroom. Like you sit 90 minutes and you think about subject X and then you move to this next, like we aren't that. But we've created this structure that we feel is productive to that.
Right.
So within that, like I would say to those teachers, to those educators, and I think about this myself, is like we can't be both educators and cops. Like we can't sit there and like try to work with learning in all its messiness and just be like, all right, I've used this tool to prove that you violated these policies, and like have to always be in that uncomfortable space, because that's not really learning. That's the people that are getting caught around, when you're using plagiarism checker tools, whether it's AI or even before AI, like the people getting caught are the people that actually need help. The people that are like really, really skilled at what they're doing, like you don't even know that they're doing it. You know what I mean? So what ends up happening is the people getting caught are the people that actually need the most amount of help, and the people that are breaking the rules really effectively in ways that might concern us. You're never going to know that they did it. You're never going to know that they actually hacked the system or that they're buying the paper or what have you.
So that's a great point, Lance, when it comes to not being a cop, right? You don't have to be a cop, be an educator. And there's a lot of systemic issues already that, regardless whether it's AI or not, we have to consider what's the best way to learn. And maybe we even have to question our system, as your suggestion. Sounds like it was built for the Industrial Revolution more than how we are best to learn and grow. Right now, it's this linear approach, as you said, but it shouldn't be. It should be really more personalized and focused. And hopefully, my feeling is that AI can be that solution to provide that customized, personalized education solution where the educators are still there to guide them, but they also have 30 AI agents helping them provide education to 30 students, right, that they normally couldn't do by themselves. So I'm excited about that, but there's a lot to navigate. So what would you say, how can educational leaders navigate these challenges around, let's say, generative AI specifically?
I think the first, and I know throughout higher ed this has been the hardest, is to actually have a policy, to have something definitive about usage that people can point to and figure out. So it's have a policy, have a deployment in support of that policy. So it's not enough just to be like, here you go, because like that's an unfunded mandate. That is a thing where it's just like, oh, here you go, we did it. You figure it out from there. So you have a policy, you have a rollout of support around it, and you give educators and students time to actually play with, like you create spaces of play with generative AI that you try to pull insights from. Like the place I start with every faculty member is to try to find out or try to build a prompt that they will find useful. Because if you can find one personal, professional usefulness of a generative AI tool, then it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Then it becomes much clearer for why other people might use it, or how other people might use it, or where you can expand from there. But if you don't have that space or time to play, to like really have some guidance in like figuring it out, it just isn't going to happen. Like I've gotten a lot of invitations to talks, and it's always just like, yep, come in and talk, and then like, boom, that's it. And it's like, but if there isn't that space to really dig into it, to like get to play, to see where it makes sense, to figure out where it works, you're just like, it's just another thing that they're like having to pay attention to.
Until they get that aha moment.
Yep.
That aha moment is beautiful to see if you see it in person, and then the wheels start turning. And then even if you start that moment with a personal prompt, right? Here's how you can use it just at home.
Yep.
It'll get the wheels turning of how they could use it professionally as well. And you're the director of faculty development and innovation at College Unbound. So you're leading that, and you're helping these leaders navigate these approaches. So I really like what you're doing, but there are some fears, right, around the usages of these tools. What do you say or what are you hearing the most popular fears are today?
The most popular fear I hear time and again is this is going to destroy our critical thinking. This is the argument of the internet is making us stupider. This is the argument that comic books are turning juveniles into delinquents. This is the argument from Socrates that writing is going to destroy our minds. Right? So there's a millennia-long argument about how a new technology is just destroying us. I don't believe it, but that fear is real. Like people feel it, and they have that confirmation bias of like they see students starting to use this en masse and being like, see, they're not critically thinking. I think that that's so easy to do, and we've done that, like I said, for millennia. I don't think it is that simple, and I think we continue to be critical, but critical thinking is something that happens in different contexts, and context to which people are deeply invested. So if somebody is not using critical thinking skills, it's an area they're not invested in. I'm more interested in that. I'm more interested in why are students not critically invested in education or in a particular course that they're using it in, because that tells me something else is going on. There's something bigger about what this course does or doesn't offer, or what this education does or doesn't provide them.
I feel like what you're good at, Lance, is understanding there's a difference between symptoms and systems.
Yep.
And a lot of these issues that people are worried about may be more symptoms to something larger. And that's what we have to focus our energies on. Is that?
That's absolutely accurate. I think what I see is, again, from that systems approach, a lot of generative AI came on the heels of the pandemic. And for many, again, I'll speak for higher ed, for many faculty, like fall 2022 was like the first, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, of normal semester, where we just, we've decided that the pandemic, COVID-19 is something we're not going to care about socially, and we're just going to go back to the way things were before. For many of them, there was like I'm back in my classroom. And it was just like, weren't even getting settled in, and then like November, this new thing shows up. And it's the same impact in many ways, because what the pandemic made everybody have to do is like completely rethink how they are teaching and learning. What generative AI does is it gives students power. It gives them an agency that they didn't have before to pass off possible, expertise level knowledge not all the time, but enough to disrupt faculty. And so faculty now are back in the spot of like, I've got to rethink my entire syllabus because it was always based upon the assumption that this couldn't be at scale easily masked. And now it is. So what does that mean if I have to change my assignments? It also means I have to then change like what I'm doing in class. I have to change my learning materials. It means I have to introduce discussing this tool and where it fits within all that. So that's a lot of labor.
Right after just dealing with the pandemic,
Right.
you thought you were good for a little bit, and
like,
then AI just hits you in the face.
Right. And so like I think there's a lot of fear among faculty and educators, and I empathize with it. Like it's real. Like I'm not dismissing it. But I think a lot of it is just realized or not, just how much is now going to be more asked of them.
It's a great point. And I even just talking to someone that works for the government, and when I was telling him about AI, he's like, Chris, I just got through the pandemic. I'm exhausted. You're telling me now this other thing's going to change the way everything is and change jobs and everything. I'm like, yep. He's like, you son of a gun. And it's natural as humans. That was exhausting, right? And to now feel like you're back to normal and then you get smacked in the face with AI, it is difficult. And you make a great point there at the educator level. Now let's go upwards to the state level. And as you know, and our audience has heard many times, we finally have the AI task force in place. And soon we'll have announcements of who's on that task force. But we know, as I've been stating, one of the key pillars of that AI task force is education. When it comes to education, it's K through 12 and higher ed. I know you're talking a lot about higher ed. That is where you are at currently. What advice would you have for the state when it comes to AI and education, and how can we rebuild our education system that enables and empowers our students, that supports our educators, and prepares our future workforce for the brand new AI economy that will create and displace jobs?
That is a fun question.
That's
right?
a loaded
That's the million-dollar
question.
I think one part within this is as they think about, as they figure out that wonderful rich puzzle, it is thinking with these tools. We're still in a place where they are helpful, but they're far from perfect. Prior to this, we were joking about images and how many fingers pop up in AI generated images. And so I think really coming up with some rubric, some measurement of assessment to really think about what that means, because we're still not at a place where we can trust AI with lives. And so as we start to put AI into think about where it shows up in education, we want to think about how then that impacts lives, because we know it's inaccurate. We also know, as some of the more recent research has shown, is the levels of bias in it are concerning. There was, I can do this as a follow-up, but there was a study, there's been a few studies. The one that I'm thinking about mostly is the way that an AI will assess a given context. If you just change the names and one name is more white sounding and another name is more African descent sounding, it changes the way that the AI responds. So, and in this case, it was the AI was to decide a punishment of whether somebody just gets the death penalty, or it was a fictional situation, to be clear, but whether the person gets the death penalty or whether the person is life in prison. And to most people's not shocked reaction, the person with the African descent name got the death penalty. The person with the more traditionally white sounding name did not. So that's the tool that we currently have. And we already know our educational systems do create unfair outcomes, unequitable outcomes. So any step that we do in this, we really have to understand and work with those people that are the owners of these tools to get under the hood, to be able to assess how it works, and to be able to do regular audits. And most importantly, for anybody in the K through 12 system, higher ed system, anybody that is going to be using or subjected to an AI system, have a clear, simple, straightforward method of challenging and getting a human opinion. We cannot do what has happened in the criminal justice system, where AI tools are used a lot. And if you are a person that is being on the judged end of an AI tool, you have no ability to challenge those outcomes. You have no ability to have anybody do an assessment of those tools and how it came to those assessments. So I think particularly if we're looking at in the state and we're going to be using these tools, really making sure we have our boxes checked to protect people from the problems that it's going to create. The thing I'm always concerned about around technology, and many others too, like it isn't just me, there's a lot of great work being done around like the edge cases where people are pushed out or people are marginalized through the technology. And I think that continues to be important. One of the reasons I get really frustrated with AI plagiarism detectors is a lot of the studies show that who gets most false positives? People that are English language learners. Because all an AI plagiarism detector is doing is looking for patterns of language or formulaic patterns of language. And guess who's going to speak in formulaic patterns of language? The person that's learning the language, because that's how we learn language. We learn it formulaically. So to me, it's like, oh gosh, like if institutions are using that, they are going to a student who English is not their first language, and they're saying, we think you use this tool. So now they have to defend themselves in a language that isn't their own, with a tool to which they can't see the back end on. And then the tool itself is not actually saying you used it, but is saying this is the probability. So you've got to figure out language. You've got to figure out math, like the probability factor. You've got to figure out the coding factor. So those things, the more we use these tools, are going to happen, and they're going to happen to people that are most marginalized already in our educational systems. And that to me is the thing that I get fiercely concerned about, because we already know we're doing that as humans, and to move it into the machine space just continues to create that distance between humans.
And that's a great point that you make when it comes to the tools, right? And making sure that we're making AI an inclusive tool that benefits all. Now let's talk about the preparing the workforce side of things. And AI is changing constantly, right? So like prompt engineering was the hottest, job title. But I bet you in 2-3 years, it's won't be the newest and hottest thing. So how does a college, let's say, or even K through 12, or higher ed, how do they prepare their students for these new jobs that don't even exist yet?
I would always take a step back and say colleges have been doing that. And I think there's a discourse about colleges that are oh, they're so stuck in whatever. And I'm well, I know, I can look at every college that I've been to. And as I said, I'm a nerd, so I've been to a couple and have a couple degrees. And I know every one of them has different degrees from the time that I went there to now, meaning they offer newer degrees, they offer newer certifications. So colleges already do respond to what's going on. It may not be the slapdash happened in 6 months, and I think that's okay, because there's a lot to figure out, and there's a lot that, as you said, we can't if it's a moving target, how do you figure it out? So I would make that note. I think really it goes back to that piece about the two buckets. That idea of it is leaning into and understanding and figuring out what does AI look like in these different disciplines. And it is also still needing deep critical understanding of the discipline, right? So marketing is a good example of, just thinking about this of you can probably do an okay job if you have no marketing background whatsoever with AI. But my guess is you're going to know. You're gonna be oh, and that I think is the thing is like, we really do still need those things and working those things together to understand like where and how to deploy it well and how to work with it well. But I still end up seeing a lot of, we just need to go all in on AI. And I always feel like, I think those, like with any other previous technology, they work together.
That's a great point. And this was really educational, no pun intended. For me and hopefully for our audiences too. But I always like to leave them with something helpful or resource so that they can just learn a little bit more as they leave. So quickly, what would be some tools that educators or students could use, some of them that you have access to or they can easily have access to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share a regular thing that I do is I have a Substack, AI plus EDU equals simplified. I think that's the name of it. I'm sure it'll be. We'll
put it in the show notes in the description.
There is a space I'm often sharing things, research, information, tools, workshops that I've done around generative AI for educators. There is the AI pedagogy project run by Meta Labs, which is a affiliation of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. They've put some really useful, accessible, and clear things around generative AI in the educational space. There's some really great, there is an AI in education listserv run by Daniel Stanford that is just this wellspring of people sharing events, things that they're doing, all of these things, and I'm always on there learning new things. So I would point those things out as like places to go to learn more for educators. I think the thing I would encourage folks, you mentioned prompt engineering, and the one tip I give everybody is the first prompt I always go to ChatGPT and give is improve this prompt to maximize large language models, colon, and then I put in my prompt. And that's both just to, like, it's both it improves the prompt, but it also teaches me more about the tool itself as I see what it chooses to emphasize and stuff. So like as a practice, as a means of like when you're toying around with it, always try to be looking for those like, what does it do? You know, how does it come to its answers? How do you enhance its answers and things like that? And then the last one would just be anybody that's just dismissing it out of hand. I always find that those are usually the instances where people have gone, they've typed in a very basic question, it's spit out something very vague. And I always encourage them to actually iterate, to have a conversation with it, to really like use it till you find a use case for it. Because I think for all of us, there's those things we don't want to do that like we have to. And like this is sometimes a tool to really help with that.
That's great. And we'll have those resources for you in the description of this YouTube show here. So check it out. Any advice for our audience or any of those stressed out educators that you have before we leave here?
We're all in this together. And the message that I've done time and again is the best thing you can do is be in conversation with your students and with your colleagues about what you're doing, what you're learning, what's making sense, what are new things you tried.
That's awesome. Yeah. Lance, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on the AI Wave podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
All right, you too.